The air in the grand concourse of the Galactic Council was always a little too cool, a little too thin. It was a compromise atmosphere, suitable for 100 species, but perfect for none. Representative Jin-Soo Kim sat in the human delegation's designated alcove, a semicircular desk of polished moonstone, and let the debate wash over him. His face, lined with the years of a long diplomatic career, was a mask of calm attention. Inside, he was counting heartbeats. Beside him, his aide Mira Park tapped a silent, complex rhythm onto the surface of her datapad. It wasn't a nervous gesture. It was a countdown. Each tap represented a milestone. A system checked. A light turned green back in the Sol system. Her dark eyes flicked from the screen to the council floor. Missing nothing. The Tel-Re delegate, all iridescent feathers and sharp clicks, was arguing about tariff brackets on deuterium exports from the Cygnus mining belts. The Gellan representative, moist skin glistening under the lights, countered with concerns about hydrocorrosion on their aquatic freighters. The Korvax, a block of living granite, rumbled a point of order about procedural precedent from 3 standard cycles ago. Jin-Soo listened, and in his mind, he heard other sounds. The clang of a wrench in the hand of an engineer named Taiyang Li, millions of light years away, as he sealed the final plasma conduit on a structure so vast it bent the eye. The calm, steady voice of Jiang Choi in a control bunker on Mars, reading off a checklist as long as her arm. The hum of 1,000,000 systems coming online. Not here, in this palace of talk, but out there, in the silent dark where humanity had decided to make its new beginning. The human delegation's position on the proposed Amendment 7C? The senior arbiter's voice, synthesized to gentle neutrality, cut through Jin-Soo's thoughts. All eyes, compound and simple and thermal sensing, turned to him. He leaned forward slightly, the movement practiced and smooth. The human delegation defers to the wisdom of the council on this minor technicality, Jin-Soo said, his voice even and clear. We have no further input at this time. A ripple of what might have been satisfaction went through the chamber. The humans were being reasonable again, quiet, unobtrusive. They had been this way for decades. Ever since their turbulent, fast-paced integration had settled into what the council saw as a manageable equilibrium. They were good engineers, capable administrators, and they rarely made a fuss. A convenient species. Myra's datapad pulsed once, a soft blue glow against her palm. Phase 1. Complete. All primary arcs are loaded and positioned. Jin-Soo gave a barely perceptible nod. He watched the Tel-Re and the Gellan resume their squabble. He remembered the first time he had sat in this chamber, full of fire and ideas, believing in the grand galactic community. He had proposed a joint initiative to reverse the desertification of New Thessa, a human colony world. The proposal had been tabled for further ecological impact studies. That was 40 years ago. The studies were still ongoing. New Thessa was now a dust ball, its population relocated, its history buried in red tape. He remembered Mira, younger, pleading with the Resource Allocation Board for emergency aid when the fungal blight hit the rice algae hybrids on the floating cities of Pacifica. The board had required proof the blight wasn't a human bioweapon gone awry first. By the time the clearance came, 1/3 of the harvest was lost. They weren't traumatic oppressions. They were 1,000 small cuts, a bureaucracy of infinite delay, a patronizing pat on the head. The galaxy, it seemed, loved humanity's labor but was indifferent to its heartbeats. The session dragged on into its 5th hour. The debate moved from tariffs to the proper spectral frequency of new navigation buoys in the Orion Spur. Jin-Soo felt the weight of the final command code, a string of numbers etched into his memory, sitting on his tongue. It was time. He stood up. In the council, one only stood to formally address the full assembly or to leave. The gentle murmur of debate died down. The senior arbiter tilted its sensory cluster toward him. Representative Kim? Esteemed senior arbiter, honored delegates, Jinsu began, his hands resting lightly on the moonstone desk. The human delegation must regrettably tender our absence from tomorrow's deliberations. We have prior commitments of a pressing nature. There was a brief, polite silence. The Korvax delegate gave a slow, grinding nod of understanding. The Telri chirped, "Noted. We expect your summary submission on the buoy matter by next cycle." "Of course," Jinsu said, his smile not reaching his eyes. He gathered a single, ill-fashioned folio from the desk. Mira was already on her feet, her datapad dark and stowed. Together, they walked from the alcove, their footsteps echoing faintly on the luminous floor. No one watched them go. The Gellin was already arguing that the blue-frequency buoys would upset the spawning cycles of its system's photoplankton. Outside the concourse, in the arched transit hallway, the artificial starlight from the viewports felt different. Jinsu let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for decades. They didn't even ask what the commitments were, Myra said, her voice quiet. There was no anger in it, just a final confirmation. Why would they? Jinsu replied, looking out at the magnificent sprawl of the Council's orbital ring, a monument to a unity that had become a cage. We are the quiet ones. We are the ones who always defer. He turned to her. Signal Earth. The Council is occupied. They suspect nothing. Tell Director Choi she has a green light for Phase 2. Myra nodded, pulling a small, secure comlink from her sleeve. As she spoke in low, rapid Korean, Jinsu looked back at the closed doors of the grand concourse. He felt a pang, not of loss, but of profound sadness for what could have been. They had come to the galaxy with open hands, and the galaxy had given them forms to fill out. On Mars, in the bustling, tense quiet of the Solacen Gate control, Jiang Choi received the coded pulse. She looked around at her team engineers like Taiyang Li, his hands still smudged with carbon. Programmers, life support specialists, all with the same determined, weary look in their eyes. Phase 2 is authorized, she announced, her voice steady. Initiate the core ignition sequence. Begin final boardings on all designated arcs. A cheer didn't go up. Instead, a deep, collective breath was taken. On screens across the complex, the Solacen Gate, a ring of impossible geometry floating between Earth and Mars, began to glow from within. It wasn't the violent burst of a rocket engine. It was a waking, a kind of gentle lighting, as if a new star was being kindled in its center dot back on the Council ring. Jinsu and Mira entered a private transport pod. As the door hissed shut, sealing them in silence, Myra looked at her former mentor. Do you think they'll ever understand, sir? Jinsu watched the receding spires of the Council complex through the viewport. One day, perhaps, when the hyperlink relays start to flicker because no one is left to recalibrate them. When the terraforming stabilizers on those worlds they bickered over today begin to fail. They will look for us then. They will check their records and see our final statement of absence. He leaned back, the starlight sliding across his face. And they will realize we weren't asking for permission to leave. We were just saying goodbye. The pod accelerated, carrying them to a waiting diplomatic cutter, its course already set not for Earth, but for the waking light of the gate. The Council's immense orbital ring hummed with its usual bureaucratic life. In the days following the human delegation's absence, very little changed. The debates continued. The Telrai and the Gellin eventually reached a compromise on the navigation buoys, concession that pleased neither of them. The empty human alcove was noted, then ignored. They were a quiet species. Perhaps they were dealing with some internal matter. But for Kaver, the youngest Telri on the Council, the quiet felt wrong. It was too complete. As she reviewed the Daily Intelligence Digest, a series of minor anomalies, each dismissed by the Council's logistics AI, caught her eye. Unusual energy signatures from the Sol system, categorized as Industrial Energy Surge Probable Cultural Festival. A spike in hyperlane traffic from human colonies, all heading coreward, labeled Internal Trade Redistribution. The deactivation of several long-range communication relays maintained by human technicians marked scheduled maintenance. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern that itched at her instincts. The humans were not a cultural festival species. Their celebrations were inward, private, and their trade was efficient, not frenzied. She bypassed the AI and went to the primary observatory. Using her counselor's clearance, she pulled the raw sensor data from the Sol system. There it was, the Solacen Gate. Council records listed it as a Class 3 trade and communications array, a human project approved cycles ago. Its energy signature, however, was not that of a communications array. She ran a diagnostic, comparing the energy waveform to known profiles. Her crest feathers flattened against her skull dot. It matched only one thing in the database, the prototype for a Cottashave Dyson bridge, a theoretical one-way, monumental FTL tunnel designed not for ships, but for whole fleets to cross galactic voids. A getaway car for a civilization. She went immediately to the senior arbiter. The being's sensory cluster wavered as she presented her findings. The energy profile is clear, Kaver insisted, her clicks rapid with urgency. They are not having a festival. They are lighting a path to another galaxy. The senior arbiter processed this. A radical conclusion, Counselor Kaver. The humans have submitted no departure notice. Such an undertaking would require resources they have not requested. Why would they leave? They have stability here. They have a seat. Why does any being leave a home? Kaver countered, frustration leaking into her voice. Because it is no longer a home. Her concerns were put to a procedural vote. The Council, weary from the buoy debate, voted to send a routine inquiry to the Human Liaison Office and to monitor the situation. It was, Kaver knew, a polite way of doing nothing. She decided not to do nothing. Using a private, secure channel, she placed a direct call to the personal code of Representative Jin-Soo Kim. To her surprise, it connected. His face appeared on her screen, calm. He was not on Earth. The background was the sterile wall of a ship. Counselor Kaver, he said, his tone polite, empty of surprise. Representative Kim, a Solacen Gate. What is its true purpose? He was silent for a long moment, as if weighing her. You have looked at the data yourself, he said finally. It wasn't a question. I have. It suggests an exodus. Tell me I am wrong. I cannot tell you that, Jin-Soo said softly. Why? The click burst from her, sharp and pained. Why would you do this? Without dialogue? Without trying? A sad, tired smile touched his lips. Counselor, how many years have you served? 3? 4? We have tried for 100. He glanced off screen, nodded at someone unseen, then looked back. You asked for an explanation. I am sending you one. It is not a declaration. It is an answer to the question you are just now learning to ask. The transmission ended. A moment later, her console chimed with an incoming data packet marked with a simple human symbol, an open folder. She opened it. It was not a single file, but a vast indexed library. And it was titled, in plain galactic standard, Too Late to Fix It. She began to scroll. It was a crushing, meticulous chronology. Petition H4491. Request for emergency ecological aid for new Thesa. Status: deferred. Attached: imagery of shrinking aquifers in barren plains. Then Empty Cities. Appeal A8823. Request for cultural preservation of the Martian first landing site threatened by Korvax mineral claims. Status: denied. Attached: before and after images of the historic dome buried under slag. Crisis submission. D0056. Immediate request for medical aid for the Pacifica Blight. Status: under review, security verification. Attached: population mortality statistics rising in a steep curve alongside the flat line of council response. On and on it went. Thousands of entries. Not wars, not grand insults, but a slow, grinding avalanche of indifference. Each deferred, denied, or under review was a brick in a wall. The data was dry, bureaucratic, and it told a story of 1,000 quiet endings, of hopes patiently presented and politely starved. The final entry was a video file. It showed a human child, a girl of maybe 8, in a simple room on what looked like a space station. She was speaking to the council. Her voice piped through a translator during some long-forgotten public comment session. "And my grandma says the stars are for everyone," the girl said, her small face serious. "But if they're for everyone, why does nobody listen?" The recording ended. The official council log next to it read, "Session note, juvenile commentary. No actionable items." Session moved to next agenda point. Kaver sat back, her feathers utterly still. The chill of the observatory seeped into her bones. She finally understood. The humans hadn't been defeated. They had simply finished a calculation. They had added up a century of no and wait and not now, and the sum total was goodbye. She rushed back to the council chamber, the data packet burning in her hand. She did not request the floor. She overrode the main display. The elegant graphs about buoy frequencies vanished, replaced by the stark, scrolling list of human petitions. "Look," she cried, her voice cutting through the procedural murmur. "Just look at it. This is not a mystery. This is an audit." The chamber fell into a stunned silence as the delegates scanned the list. The Gellan representative shifted, its skin blotching with discomfort. The Korvax delegate's stony face was unreadable, but a low rumble emanated from within. "They were talking to us," Cover said, the fury gone, leaving only a hollow certainty. "They were talking for 100 years. We just never bothered to listen. We were too busy managing the galaxy to hear the people living in it. The gate is not their betrayal. It is our failure." As she spoke, deep in the Sol system, the Solacen Gate transitioned from a gentle glow to a brilliant, serene vortex of folded light. The first human arcs, vessels containing libraries, ecosystems, and generations of dreams, began to pass through its luminous ring. They left without a sound, their departure the quietest, loudest statement the council had ever received. And in the silent chamber, illuminated by the ghostly light of 1,000 rejected pleas, the galaxy's governing body finally began, too late, to hear the echo of their absence. A cold, formal panic began to spread through the Galactic Council. The evidence was undeniable. Kaver-S raw data, combined with real-time sensor feeds now screaming with priority alerts, painted a picture not of a migration, but of a vanishing. The Solacen Gate was active, and its energy signature was a clear one-way road out of the galaxy. The senior arbiter, its sensory cluster vibrating with uncharacteristic distress, authorized an emergency diplomatic mission to Earth, a council cutter, carrying a mixed delegation of Telri, Gellan, and Korvax, dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Sol system. What they found was silence where there should have been noise. The system's traffic control channels emitted only automated beacons. The bustling orbital docks around Mars hung empty, their gantries skeletal against the red planet. Earth itself, the blue-green jewel, was shrouded in an eerie quiet. Their ship, adorned with the Council's sigil, Received no hails, no challenges, no welcome dot. They set down in what was once Seoul. The landing pad was clean, pristine, even. The air was breathable, the city's climate system still functioning. But there were no people. No ground vehicles hummed along the wide avenues. No faces looked out from the crystalline towers. The only sound was the wind sighing between buildings and the distant, rhythmic crash of waves on a now empty shore. They were met by a single figure, an elderly human man named Minho, sitting on a bench in a small, immaculate park. He wore simple clothes and a look of deep, unshakable peace. Beside him sat a small crate. The gallant delegate, its vocal sac pulsing, stepped forward. "Human, we are the Galactic Council. We seek Representative Kim. We seek anyone." Minho looked up, his eyes clear. "You're a bit late," he said, his voice gentle. "They've all gone through. The last ships passed the threshold about 6 hours ago. The Tel-Re envoy, a different one from Caver, fluttered its feathers. Gone? Where? This is irrational. They must return. There must be dialogue." Minho offered a small, sad smile. "Dialogue requires 2 willing parties. For a long time, you had only one." He gestured to the crate. "They left this for you." Instructions were to give it to the first council authority that showed up. The Korvax delegate bent its stone-like body and retrieved the crate. It was not locked. Inside were dozens of smooth, crystalline data storage devices, human-made, but compatible with standard readers. Each was labeled with coordinates: New Thesa archives, Pacifica oral histories, Martian first settlement logs, Lunar Arc repository. "What is the meaning of this?" The Gellan asked, its skin flushing with confusion. "What you asked for," Minho said, leaning back on the bench. "Proof, impact studies, cultural assessments, all the data you ever requested in perfect order. Took them the last 5 years to compile it all. They finished last week." He watched their incomprehension. "You never listened. You only ever managed." So they stopped talking and started packing. As the delegates stood, stunned, Minho looked past them, toward the sky where the gate was invisibly tethered. "They left me because I'm old. My story is here, in this soil. Theirs is out there now." While the ground team reported back, the council cutter's sensors were trained on the gate. The feed was piped live to every screen in the grand concourse. The councilors watched, a silent, disparate audience. As the final act played out, the last human vessels were not the massive, blocky arcs that had gone before. They were sleek, fast scouts and guardians, the rear guard. They moved with a graceful, deliberate silence. There were no triumphant broadcasts, no final speeches. Only the quiet, purposeful ballet of a people closing a door behind them. One by one, the ships aligned with the luminous vortex of the gate. The vortex did not suck them in. It seemed to welcome them, the light parting like a curtain. Each ship would glow for a moment, its outline fusing with the brilliance, and then it would be gone. The silence on the bridge of the council cutter and in the council chamber was absolute. It was not a violent departure. It was a solemn, heartbreakingly beautiful dissolution. Caver watched from her station, her feathers tight against her body. She wasn't looking at the ships, but at the faces of her fellow counselors. She saw the dawning realization, not just of a political loss, but of an aesthetic and spiritual one. The humans had created something profound in their exit, a final piece of art that underscored their message. We are capable of wonders you never appreciated. The last ship? A solitary needle of dark metal adorned with a single. Simple symbol, a hand open in farewell paused at the threshold. For a long moment it hung there, silhouetted against the roiling light. Then, with a finality that seemed to vibrate through the very sensors, it slid forward and was absorbed. The gate itself did not shut down. It remained open, a silent, glowing eye in the cosmos. Then, as per its programming, it began to collapse. The light did not explode outward. It folded inward, dimming gracefully, pulling the vast structure into a point of impossible darkness before winking out entirely. Where a monument to a new beginning had been, there was now only empty space in the grand concourse. The silence broke into a cacophony of clicks, rumbles, and splutters. Demands for action, for pursuit, for explanation. But the senior arbiter's voice, when it came, was hollow. Pursuit to where? The bridge is gone. The destination is unknown. There is no path to follow. A new report flashed on the main screen. It was from the engineering cores. Key subsystems across the Council's own infrastructure, the hyperlink relays that, enabled instant communication across sectors. The environmental stabilizers on a dozen frontier worlds. The long-range sensor grids were reporting critical failures. Diagnostics indicated the failures were not attacks, but the result of the removal of a sustaining layer of code, of maintenance, of care. The humans had not sabotaged anything. They had simply stopped tending to systems everyone assumed would run forever. They had taken their expertise with them. Caver finally stood. She did not shout. In the new silence, her voice was very clear. They are gone. They took their hands, their minds, and their hearts. We are left with the machinery, and we do not know how to make it sing. She looked at the empty space on the view screen, where a gate to a future had once been. We were the custodians of a galaxy they were willing to call home. We presided over the meeting, but we forgot to welcome the guests. And now the house feels very, very empty. On the bench in Seoul, Minho watched the council cutter lift off, its engines a lonely sound in the still air. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dried flower from his garden. He held it for a moment, then let the wind take it. Somewhere, on the other side of a light-years-wide void, a new sun was rising on a new world. He closed his eyes, feeling its imagined warmth on his face, and smiled. The silence that followed humanity's departure was not peaceful. It was the tense, brittle quiet of a machine trying to run with its most vital parts removed. The Galactic Council, for the first time in its millennia of operation, faced a crisis that could not be solved with debate, procedure, or a subcommittee. The failures began as whispers, then became shouts. On the agri-world of Viridia, the atmospheric processors began to stutter. They were of human design, elegant and efficient, maintained for decades by a small, unnoticed team of human engineers. The local Gellan administrators had the manuals, but the manuals spoke of intuitive calibration and dynamic balancing. A human engineer named Jisoo had done it by ear, by feel. Without her, the processors skewed. Rain turned acidic. The vast fungal plains began to yellow at the edges. In the asteroid belt of the Korvax mining system K7, the network of gravitic tethers that gently moved raw ore started to drift out of alignment. The Korvax were master geologists, but the tethers used a harmonic stabilization model devised by a human physicist, Minjun. His equations were in the database, but the footnote he had scribbled in the margin was not. Resonance dips during local star solar flares. Compensate with a 0.3 pulse variation. Without that note, two asteroids, each the size of a mountain, collided. The resulting shockwave disabled a third of the operation, but it was the hyperlink network that truly revealed the depth of the void. This was the nervous system of the galaxy, allowing near-instantaneous communication. Human programmers had woven its foundational code. They had also been its silent gardeners, constantly pruning data thickets and reinforcing pathways against cosmic static. Within a week of the exodus, the network developed a kind of sclerosis. Transmission times lagged. Signals fragmented. The Council's own urgent queries to its far-flung members bounced back corrupted. Kyver traveled. She could not sit in the chamber and listen to the arguments about whose fault it was. She needed to see the emptiness with her own eyes. Her first stop was a small human research outpost on a moon called Selene, orbiting a gas giant. It had been a xenobiology station, studying the silicon-based lichen that grew in the planet's radiation-soaked rings. The outpost was a series of domes, clean and intact. The air inside was stale but breathable. She walked through the labs. Specimen jars were neatly labeled. Microscopes were powered down and covered. On a communal table in the mess hall, a game of cards had been left mid-hand. A cup of tea, long evaporated, sat beside a data slate. The last entry on the slate was a personal log from a researcher named Suman. Day 1437. The Council denied the extension for the lichen growth cycle study. They said the resources were needed for a broader taxonomic survey. They're going to melt the rings for heavy elements in 3 standard cycles. All this life, this strange, beautiful life, it's just a footnote to them. We packed the core samples today. I hope where we're going, curiosity is still a virtue. Kyver moved to the main observation dome. Here, a large view screen was frozen on a stunning image of the gas giant's rings, streaked with iridescent colors from the lichen. Scrawled across the screen in marker, in graceful human handwriting, was a sentence. We take our stories with us. The words felt like a physical weight. They hadn't just taken their people and their machines. They had taken their way of seeing, their wonder. Their commitment to a single strange lichen dot. Her next stop was an asteroid colony, a way station for deep space freighters. It was a functional place, all gray metal and harsh light. It was also empty. In a small schoolroom, plastic planets still dangled from the ceiling. On a blackboard, a lesson was half erased. Kyver could make out the shapes of human letters and numbers. At the bottom of the board, written neatly and left untouched, was another message. Lesson for today. Home is not a place. It is a promise. Be good to each other. Teacher Suman. The same name. A different person, perhaps, or maybe a common hope. A final lesson left for anyone who might find it. Back in the council chamber, the mood had shifted from panic to a grim, bewildered exhaustion. The Gellan delegate reported on the Viridia crisis. The Korvax rumbled about the mining belt losses. The Telri communications minister detailed the hyperlink decay. We must recall them. The Gellan insisted, its skin mottled with stress. We must send a message. A sincere appeal. To where? The senior arbiter asked, its sensory cluster drooping. The gate is gone. They are beyond any known channel. We can broadcast. The Telri minister clicked. A galaxy-wide broadcast on all frequencies. An apology. An offer to reform. It was a desperate, clumsy idea, but it was the only one they had. So they composed a message. It was full of grand language about the galactic family and shared destiny. It acknowledged procedural oversights and promised a new era of attentive governance. It was, Kyver thought as she listened, the kind of message they should have sent 100 years ago. It was management, not understanding that they poured enormous power into the broadcast, sending it in every direction, hoping it would somehow find a crack in the void and reach human ears. Weeks passed. The failures multiplied. The galaxy felt slower, dimmer, more fragile. The Council's broadcast echoed into the endless dark, met with a silence more profound than any they had ever known. No answer ever came. The only response was the continuing evidence of absence. A coolant leak here. A navigation database corruption there. A cultural archive on a newly discovered species, left partially translated by a human linguist named Hana, now forever incomplete. Caver sat in her quarters, watching a star field. She finally understood the true cost. It wasn't about the broken machines. It was about the stories that would never be told, the discoveries never made, the gentle, stubborn hope that had once looked at the stars and seen a home, but had now turned its eyes elsewhere. The galaxy had not been robbed. It had been left behind. And in the echoing quiet, the council began its slow, painful education in what it really means to be alone. One standard cycle passed. The grand concourse of the Galactic Council had changed. The changes were subtle, but to anyone who remembered the before, they were stark. The central holographic display, once perpetually cycling through agendas and trade indices, now often showed the silent, empty point in space where the Solace Gate had been. The seats were often filled, not with delegates arguing, but with junior officials studying. They studied the human petitions from the Too Late to Fix It archive. They studied the fragments of human culture left behind. Today, the chamber was hushed. On the main screen was a live feed from a deep space observatory probe. Today was the day. 1 year to the hour after the last human ship had passed through, the final piece of the Solace Gate's programming was set to execute its total, non-recoverable self-destruction. It was a courtesy, the engineers guessed, to ensure no one would be tempted to follow, to risk the void. To make the break clean, the counselors were all present. No one had called for a vote. They simply came. Caver stood at her station, her feathers lying flat. The senior arbiter's sensory cluster was focused on the screen. The Gallan delegate sat perfectly still, its skin a pale, neutral gray. The probe's feed showed the dark of interstellar space. Then, a soft silver shimmer began to coalesce. It was the last vestige of the gate's energy, a phantom limb. It glowed gently, like a memory fighting to be seen one last time. As they watched, Caver spoke. Her voice was quiet, but in the silent chamber, it carried to every ear. "I found something else," she said. In an archive on one of their abandoned colony ships, left behind for weight. A fragment of their poetry, translated by one of their last linguists, a man named Sang-hoon. She looked down at a datapad, though she did not need to read the words. She had memorized them. She began to recite, her clicks softening into something almost melodic. "I think I'll go home now. The sun here is a stranger's lamp. The wind speaks a language of dust. I will fold the map of this place, and use it to kindle my own hearth. Do not follow. The path closes behind me, and I am already elsewhere." Listening to a new dawn. The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. They were not a curse or a boast. They were an explanation, quieter and more profound than any diplomatic communique. The sun here is a stranger's lamp. On the screen, the shimmering silver light began to contract. It did not explode. It collapsed in on itself with a terrible, beautiful finality. It grew smaller and smaller, a dying star, until it was a single brilliant pinprick. Then, with a final flash that left dark spots on the visual feed, it was gone. Not even debris remained. It was as if it had never been. The last physical tether was severed. The door was not just closed. It was unmade. For a long time, no one in the chamber moved or spoke. They were watching the birth of a permanent absence. The senior arbiter was the first to break the silence. Its voice was different now, less certain, more thoughtful. "We have begun reforms," it stated, a fact, not a boast. All new petitions are now heard within 3 sessions. The under-review status has a mandatory resolution timeline. "We are learning to listen." A Corvax delegate rumbled. "The hyperlink network is stable, at 42% of its former efficiency. We have rebuilt it. It is slower. It requires more care, but it is ours to maintain now." They were trying. The galaxy was learning the hard way how to be a community without its most patient members. It was a quieter, more labor-intensive place. The grand, easy unity was gone, replaced by a cautious, earnest cooperation. The session adjourned not with a formal decree, but with a slow, thoughtful dispersion. Caver was the last to leave. She walked not to the transit hall, but down a side corridor to a section of administrative offices that had been repurposed. One office, kept locked, was now a kind of memorial. It had been Jinsu Kim's. She used her clearance. The door slid open. The room was bare, stripped of personal effects. The only thing left was a standard-issue console datapad on the empty desk. It had been missed in the final departure. Its power cell was nearly dead, but when she touched the screen, it flickered to life. It was on a drafting screen. An unsent message. The recipient field was blank. The text was in human script, but the pad offered a translation. Caver read the words, and they became the final lesson, the epitaph for the human age in the galaxy. You can't fix a relationship after the other person has already closed the door. You can only learn how to not repeat the mistake. She stood there for a long time, the faint light of the dying datapad reflecting in her eyes. He hadn't even sent it. He hadn't thought there was a point. It was just a note to himself, a final, private confirmation. She placed the pad back on the desk. She left the office, the door sighing shut behind her, sealing the quiet thought inside. Later, on the observation deck, Kyver looked out at the sprawl of stars. Somewhere out there, in another galaxy, under a stranger's sun that was now a friend's lamp, humans were building. They were planting seeds in new soil. They were telling their children the old stories and beginning new ones. They had taken their laughter, their grief, their stubborn hope, and their gentle hands with them. The council watched the stars now with a new feeling, not ownership, but a kind of longing wonder. They had managed a galaxy. Humanity had tried to make it a home, and when they saw it could not be won, they had possessed the courage and the quiet heartbreak to go and build another. The lesson was etched into the silence, into the slower pace of life, into the careful way delegates now listened to the smallest species with the smallest voices. It was a lesson bought at the price of an empty chair, a silent channel, and a door that would never open again, too late to fix it. But perhaps, just perhaps, not too late to learn. The stars glittered, cold and beautiful, holding their secrets a little closer now.